She stood in a courtroom wearing a thrift store blazer 2 sizes too big, accused of wearing medals she never earned. The judge called her Silver Star, a fantasy. The prosecution called her a fraud. Every piece of evidence said she was lying, and she refused to say a single word in her own defense. The room watched her in silence, some with pity, others with contempt. No one believed her. No one stood for her. She looked too tired, too broken, too invisible to be the hero she claimed to be. But what they didn't know was that her silence wasn't weakness. It was an oath, and the truth she was protecting would soon walk through those doors and change everything. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories of quiet courage and hidden sacrifice, consider subscribing. The courtroom thought they knew who she was. They were about to be proven devastatingly wrong. The federal courthouse in Portland looked tired that Thursday morning. Rain had been falling since dawn, streaking the tall windows with gray water that blurred the city beyond. Inside, the hallways echoed with the shuffle of attorneys in cheap suits and defendants who'd been through this dance before. It was the kind of building where justice happened quietly, without cameras or spectators, where cases got processed like paperwork and nobody paid much attention unless you gave them a reason to. Courtroom 7B was nearly empty. A handful of people scattered across the gallery benches. 2 journalists near the back, scrolling through their phones. A court clerk organizing files with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional white that made everyone look slightly unwell. Eden Falk sat at the defendant's table, wearing a blazer that didn't fit. The sleeves were too long. The shoulders hung loose. It was navy blue polyester, the kind you could find at a thrift store for $12, and it had a small stain near the bottom, hem, that she'd tried to cover by keeping her hand over it. Beneath the table, her legs were crossed at the ankle. Her shoes were scuffed black flats, worn at the heels. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing to draw the eye. She sat perfectly still. Her posture was military straight, spine aligned, shoulders back. But her eyes were fixed on a spot in the middle of the table. She didn't look at the prosecutor across the aisle. She didn't look at the empty jury box. She didn't look at the handful of people in the gallery who'd come to watch another fraud case get dismantled. Beside her, Jeremy Loftus shuffled through a stack of papers that seemed to offer him no comfort whatsoever. He was a public defender in his early 30s, already developing the particular weariness that came from losing more cases than you won. His tie was crooked. His briefcase was overstuffed. He'd been assigned to Eden's case 3 weeks ago and had spent most of that time trying to convince her to take a plea deal. She'd refused every time, wouldn't explain why, wouldn't give him names of people to call, wouldn't provide a single piece of evidence to support her story. He leaned toward her now, keeping his voice low. "Are you sure you don't want to reconsider the plea? We could probably get it down to 18 months with good behavior." Eden didn't respond. Didn't even blink. Loftus sighed and leaned back. He'd stopped being surprised by her silence days ago. Now he was just resigned to it. Across the aisle, Assistant United States Attorney Diane Hogarth arranged her files with the kind of precision that suggested she enjoyed this part. She was in her mid-40s, sharp-featured, with reading glasses that hung on a chain around her neck. She'd prosecuted 12 stolen valor cases in the past 4 years. She had a perfect record. She knew exactly how these cases went. The defendant would claim some heroic service. The evidence would show otherwise. The jury, or in this case the judge, would see through the lies. Justice would be served. She glanced over at Eden with an expression that wasn't quite contempt, but wasn't far from it. Another fraud. Another person trying to steal honor they hadn't earned. Hogarth had seen it before. They all looked the same after a while. Desperate, delusional, willing to say anything to feel important. The bailiff stood near the side door, hands clasped behind his back. All rise, the Honorable Judge Malcolm Pruitt presiding. Everyone stood, the sound of chairs scraping against linoleum, the rustle of fabric, the small cough from someone in the gallery. Judge Malcolm Pruitt entered from his chambers with the bearing of a man who believed deeply in his own authority. He was 58, silver hair perfectly combed, wearing his robes like a suit of armor. He'd served in the Navy 30 years ago, a surface warfare officer on a destroyer in the Gulf. It was the defining experience of his life, the thing he mentioned at fundraisers and veteran events, the credential that gave him moral standing when cases like this came before his bench. He took his seat. "Be seated." Everyone sat. Pruitt looked down at the file in front of him, then up at the courtroom. "The case before us today is United States versus Eden Falk. Ms. Hogarth, you may proceed." Hogarth stood, smoothing the front of her suit. "Thank you, Your Honor. The United States charges the defendant, Eden Falk, with fraudulent representation under the Stolen Valor Act of 2013. Specifically, Ms. Falk has falsely claimed to have earned a Silver Star, a Navy Cross, and a Purple Heart while serving as a Navy SEAL sniper. These are among the highest military honors our nation can bestow. The evidence will show that Ms. Falk did serve in the United States Navy, but not in the capacity she has claimed. Her actual service record tells a very different story." Pruitt nodded, slowly making a note. "Ms. Falk, how do you plead?" Silence. Eden remained perfectly still, eyes on the table. Loftus nudged her leg under the table. "Ms. Falk, you need to answer the judge. Not guilty." Her voice was so quiet it barely carried past the first row. Pruitt leaned forward. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Not guilty." Still quiet, but clearer this time. No emotion, no defiance. Just two words spoken like they cost something to say. Pruitt studied her for a long moment. His expression shifted slightly from irritation to something more curious. He'd seen a lot of defendants in his courtroom. The ones who were guilty usually had a tell: anger, defensiveness, desperation. This woman had none of that. She just looked empty. "Very well. Ms. Hogarth, call your first witness." Hogarth stood again, this time with a file folder in hand. "The United States calls Lieutenant Commander Iris Bellamy, Navy Personnel Specialist." A woman in Navy dress blues entered from the back of the courtroom, mid-40s, crisp uniform, ribbons aligned perfectly. She walked with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd testified before. She was sworn in, took the seat in the witness box, and folded her hands in her lap. Hogarth approached. "Commander Bellamy, can you please describe your current position?" "I'm the Deputy Director of Personnel Records at the Naval Personnel Command in Millington, Tennessee. I oversee the maintenance and verification of service records for active duty and former Navy personnel." "And are you familiar with the service record of Eden Falk, the defendant?" "Yes. I reviewed her complete file at the request of your office. Can you summarize what that record shows?" Bellamy opened a folder on her lap. "Eden Falk enlisted in the United States Navy on June 12, 2014. She completed basic training at Recruit Training Command, Great Lakes. She was then assigned to the Supply Corps and sent to Naval Base San Diego, where she worked as a logistics specialist for the duration of her enlistment. She was honorably discharged on June 18, 2018. 4 years of service, all stateside. No combat deployments, no special warfare training, no SEAL qualification." Bellamy looked up, and for the first time there was something close to disapproval in her expression. Women were not eligible to serve as Navy SEALs during Ms. Falk's enlistment period. That policy didn't change until 2016, and even then, candidates had to meet rigorous standards and complete extensive training. Ms. Falk's record shows none of that. She was a supply technician. Hogarth nodded, letting that sink in. "And what about the medals she claims to have earned? The Silver Star, the Navy Cross, the Purple Heart. Do those appear in her record?" "No. Her record shows she received the National Defense Service Medal and the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal. Both are standard awards. There is no documentation of any combat action, no citation for valor, and no record of injuries sustained in combat." Hogarth turned to face the gallery, making sure everyone could see the file she was holding. "So to be clear, according to the official records of the United States Navy, Eden Falk served honorably but unremarkably in a support role, never saw combat, and never earned any of the medals she has claimed?" "That is correct." "Thank you, Commander. No further questions." Pruitt looked at Loftus. Cross-examination? Loftus stood slowly. He glanced at Eden, hoping for some signal, some piece of information he could use. She didn't look at him. "Commander Bellamy, is it possible for service records to be incomplete?" Bellamy frowned slightly. "Incomplete in what way? Could there be information that isn't reflected in the standard personnel file? All service records are maintained according to Department of Defense regulations. If a sailor serves, it's documented. But hypothetically, if someone were involved in classified operations, would that appear in a standard personnel file? Hogarth stood. Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. There's no evidence to suggest any classified operations. Sustained. Mr. Loftus, do you have any actual evidence of classified service? Loftus hesitated. No, Your Honor. Then move on. Loftus sat back down. He had nothing else. Eden hadn't given him anything to work with. He looked at her one more time. She was still staring at the table, jaw tight, hands hidden beneath the surface. Pruitt made another note. Ms. Hogarth, your next witness. The United States calls Roland Pickett. An older man entered the courtroom. He was in his mid-60s, wearing a Navy veteran's ball cap and a windbreaker covered in unit patches. He moved with the careful dignity of someone who'd earned the right to wear those symbols. He was sworn in and took his seat. Hogarth approached with a gentler tone than she'd used with the first witness. Mr. Pickett, thank you for being here. Can you tell the court how you know the defendant? I met her at a Veterans Day ceremony last November. It was at the Memorial Park downtown. There were maybe 200 people there, veterans from different branches, different eras. I was there with my post from the VFW. And did you speak with Miss Falk? I did. She was standing off to the side, away from the main group. She was wearing a coat, but I could see the ribbons on her chest underneath. One of them was a silver star. That's not something you see every day. So I walked over and thanked her for her service. What did she say? Pickett's expression tightened. She said she appreciated it. I asked her where she served. She said it was classified, places she couldn't talk about. And what was your reaction? At first I thought she was just being humble. A lot of folks who've been in combat don't like to talk about it, but something felt off. So later, I asked around, tried to verify her story through the channels we have in the veteran community. Nobody knew her, no record of her in any SEAL teams, no citations, nothing. Why did you decide to report her? Pickett looked directly at Eden for the first time. Because stolen valor is an insult. Every time someone lies about their service, they're spitting on the people who actually earn those medals. I wore my uniform for 22 years. I deployed 4 times. I knew men who died earning the honors this woman is pretending to have. It's not right. The courtroom was silent. Even the journalists had stopped scrolling. Hogarth let the moment breathe. Thank you, Mr. Pickett. No further questions. Loftus stood again, but his heart wasn't in it. Mr. Pickett, when you spoke with Miss Falk, did she specifically say she was a Navy SEAL? She didn't have to. The silver star, the way she carried herself. It was implied. But she didn't explicitly say it. No, but that doesn't change what she was doing. Loftus nodded and sat down. There was nothing more to say. Pruitt looked at Eden. Ms. Falk, you've heard the testimony. Is there anything you'd like to say at this time? Eden's hands were clenched so tightly beneath the table that her knuckles were white. Her breathing was shallow, controlled, like she was counting each inhale and exhale. But she didn't speak. Pruitt's expression darkened. Ms. Falk, this is your trial. You have the right to defend yourself. If you have an explanation, now is the time. Still nothing. Your Honor, Loftus said quietly, my client is exercising her right to remain silent. She's not being accused of a crime that requires her silence, Mr. Loftus. She's being accused of lying about her service. If she has proof, she should present it. If she has witnesses, she should call them. Her silence is not a defense. Eden's jaw tightened, but she didn't look up. Pruitt leaned back in his chair, studying her like a puzzle he couldn't solve. Fine. Ms. Hogarth, do you have any additional witnesses? One more, Your Honor. The United States calls Dr. Wendell Cray. A man in his 50s entered, wearing a tweed jacket and wire-rimmed glasses. He had the air of someone who spent more time in academia than courtrooms. He was sworn in and took his seat with the careful posture of someone used to being listened to. Hogarth approached. Dr. Cray, can you please state your credentials for the court? I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in identity formation and trauma response. I've published extensively on the phenomenon of constructed identities, particularly in individuals who have experienced significant life stressors. Have you reviewed the case materials related to Ms. Falk? I have, And based on your expertise, do you have an opinion about why someone might fabricate a military record? Cray adjusted his glasses, settling into his explanation. Identity construction is a coping mechanism. When individuals feel invisible or inadequate, they sometimes create alternate narratives to compensate. In Ms. Falk's case, the evidence suggests she served in a support role, which, while valuable, lacks the recognition and prestige associated with combat arms. Claiming to be a Navy SEAL, earning medals for valor, these are ways of constructing a self-image that feels more significant. So you're saying she's lying because she wants attention? I'm saying she's created a narrative that allows her to feel valued. It's not necessarily conscious. For some people, the line between what they wish were true and what they believe to be true becomes blurred. They start to inhabit the story. And what about her refusal to defend herself? What does that suggest? Cray glanced at Eden, clinical and detached. Silence can be a form of protection. If she admits the truth, she loses the identity she's constructed. If she defends the lie, she risks being exposed. Silence allows her to maintain the narrative without confrontation. Hogarth nodded slowly. So, in your professional opinion, Ms. Falk is not a decorated war hero. She's someone who needs to be seen as one. Based on the evidence, yes. Thank you, Dr. Cray. No further questions. Pruitt looked at Loftus, but the public defender just shook his head. He had nothing. No way to counter a psychologist who made Eden sound like a case study instead of a person. The judge closed the file in front of him. We'll take a 1-hour recess before I deliver my ruling. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo longer than it should have. Everyone stood as Pruitt exited. Then the courtroom began to empty. The journalists headed for the door, already drafting their headlines. The clerk gathered files. The bailiff checked his watch. Eden remained seated. She didn't move, didn't look around, just sat there with her hands still hidden beneath the table, breathing slowly, eyes fixed on nothing. Loftus stood beside her, closing his briefcase. I'm going to make some calls, see if there's anything I can do before sentencing. But, Eden, I need you to understand. If you don't give me something to work with, there's nothing I can do. She didn't respond. He sighed and walked away. The courtroom was nearly empty now. Just Eden at the defendant's table and a few stragglers in the gallery. And one other person, a woman in her early 40s, sat 3 rows back, dressed in business casual, Simone Ibarra. She'd been there since the trial started, sitting quietly, taking notes on a leather portfolio. She hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't drawn attention to herself, but she'd watched every moment with the focus of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Now, as the courtroom emptied, she stood and walked slowly down the aisle. Her heels clicked softly on the linoleum. She passed Eden's table without stopping, but as she did, she said something so quietly that only Eden could hear. It won't be much longer. Eden's eyes flicked up for just a second. There was recognition there, a flash of something that wasn't hope but wasn't quite despair either. Simone kept walking. She reached the doors, pushed through, and was gone. Eden sat alone in the empty courtroom. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Rain continued to streak the windows. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to what happened in this room. She closed her eyes and exhaled slowly, like she was preparing for something, like she was counting down to a moment only she could see. And somewhere in that silence, in that stillness, there was a question hanging in the air that no one had thought to ask. What if she was telling the truth? What if every word of her story was real, but she simply couldn't prove it? What if the most heroic thing she'd ever done was sitting in this courtroom, accepting judgment, because the alternative would be breaking an oath she'd never betray? The clock on the wall ticked forward. 1 hour until sentencing. 1 hour until the judge would decide her fate based on evidence that told only half the story. 1 hour until the doors would open and everything would change. Eden opened her eyes. She looked at the empty bench where Pruitt had sat. She looked at the gallery where people had watched her like she was a curiosity. She looked at the table in front of her, scarred with years of use, marked by the hands of 1,000 other defendants who'd sat in this same spot, facing their own reckonings. And she waited. Because waiting was all she had left. Waiting and silence and the thin, fragile hope that someone, somewhere, was keeping a promise she couldn't speak out loud. The rain kept falling, the lights kept humming, and Eden Falk sat perfectly still, a ghost in her own story, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally be allowed to walk through the door. If you've ever felt invisible or known someone who carried a weight no one else could see, leave a comment below. Sometimes the quietest people have the loudest stories. And if you want to hear how this ends, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about courage. The hour passed like a held breath. Eden remained at the defendant's table while the courtroom stayed empty. The rain outside had softened to a drizzle, leaving the windows streaked in gray. She could hear sounds from the hallway, muffled conversations, footsteps, the distant ring of a phone. Normal sounds for a normal day in a place where lives were quietly decided. She hadn't moved. Her hands were still beneath the table, fingers interlaced so tightly they'd gone numb. She'd learned a long time ago how to sit perfectly still, how to control her breathing, how to make herself small enough that people would forget she was there. It was a survival skill, one she'd practiced for years, and it had never failed her until now. Jeremy Loftus returned 10 minutes before the hour was up. He looked worse than before. His tie was loosened. His hair was disheveled. He dropped into the chair beside her with the heaviness of defeat. I made some calls, tried to reach anyone who might be able to verify your service. Every number you gave, me goes to a voicemail that never gets returned. Every contact is unreachable or doesn't exist. Eden, I don't know what you want me to do here. She didn't answer. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. If you go to prison for this, it's going to be bad. Stolen valor cases get attention. Other inmates don't take kindly to people who fake military service. You'll be a target. Do you understand that? Still nothing. Lofty sat back, rubbing his face. Fine. But when this is over, when you're sitting in a cell wondering why nobody helped you, remember that I tried. The bailiff returned, taking his position by the door. The gallery began to fill again. The journalists were back, laptops open, ready to file their stories the moment Pruitt delivered his sentence. Roland Pickett sat in the third row, arms crossed, watching Eden with the quiet judgment of someone who believed he'd done the right thing. Diane Hogarth entered, looking satisfied. She'd already won. The evidence was overwhelming. The defendant had no defense. This was just a formality now. And then, at the back of the courtroom, Simone Ibarra returned. She took the same seat as before, 3 rows back, and opened her leather portfolio. She wrote something down, checked her watch, and settled in to wait. All rise. The courtroom stood. Judge Pruitt entered with the same authority as before, but now there was something else in his expression. Finality. He'd made his decision, and he was ready to deliver it. Be seated. Everyone sat. The room felt smaller now, like the walls had moved closer during the recess. The air was thick with anticipation. Pruitt opened the file in front of him and looked directly at Eden. Ms. Falk, I've presided over many cases in my years on this bench. I've seen people lie for money. I've seen them lie to avoid consequences. I've seen them lie because they thought they could get away with it. But this case is different. This case offends me on a personal level. He adjusted his glasses, his voice taking on the weight of moral authority. I served in the United States Navy. I know what it means to wear the uniform. I know the sacrifices men and women make when they deploy, when they leave their families, when they put themselves in harm's way. And I know the value of the medals and commendations that recognize that service. Eden's breathing was shallow, controlled. Her eyes remained fixed on the table. You claim to have earned a Silver Star. Do you know what that medal represents, Ms. Falk? It's awarded for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. It's the 3rd highest military decoration. Men and women have died earning that honor, and you've been walking around wearing one you didn't earn. He leaned forward, his voice hardening. The evidence in this case is clear. Your service record shows you were a supply technician. You never deployed. You never saw combat. You never did anything remotely resembling the actions required to earn the medals you claim. And yet, when given the opportunity to explain yourself, you remained silent. Loftus shifted uncomfortably beside her. Eden's hands tightened beneath the table. Your silence tells me everything I need to know. You have no defense because there is no defense. You fabricated a story to make yourself feel important. You wore medals you didn't earn. You deceived veterans who honored you. And now, faced with the truth, you have nothing to say. Pruitt picked up a pen, preparing to write. Miss Falk, I find you guilty of fraudulent representation under the Stolen Valor Act. Before I pass sentence, I'm going to give you one final opportunity. If there is anything at all, you'd like to say in your defense, now is the time." The courtroom held its breath. Journalists paused mid-keystroke. Roland Pickett leaned forward. Even Hogarth seemed curious, waiting to see if Eden would finally break. Eden stood slowly. Her legs were unsteady, but she locked her knees and forced herself upright. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "I serve my country with honor." Pruitt's expression didn't change. "That's not an explanation, Ms. Falk. It's the only one I can give." Her voice was hollow, emptied of everything except the truth of those words. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't defending. She was simply stating a fact that she knew no one would believe. Pruitt's jaw tightened. "Then I have no choice but to sentence you to 3 years in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. You'll also be required to pay restitution to the veterans' organizations you deceived. Bailiff, please take the defendant into custody." The bailiff moved toward Eden's table, and that's when it happened. The double doors at the back of the courtroom exploded open with a sound like thunder. Every head turned. The bailiff froze. Pruitt looked up, his expression shifting from authority to confusion. A man strode through the doors with the kind of presence that made everyone in the room sit up straighter without realizing they were doing it. He was 60 years old, silver-haired, wearing a navy dress uniform so pristine it looked like it had been assembled by hands that understood the weight of every ribbon, every pin, every star. And there were 4 stars on his collar. Admiral Declan Rook walked down the center aisle with measured, deliberate steps. His face was carved from stone. His eyes were fixed straight ahead. Behind him, 2 junior officers followed in perfect formation, their uniforms equally immaculate, their expressions neutral but alert. The courtroom was silent, not the silence of waiting, but the silence of collective shock. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Even Pruitt seemed frozen, his mouth slightly open, his hand still holding the pen he'd been about to use to sign Eden's sentence. Rook reached the defendant's table. He stopped directly in front of Eden. She was still standing, her body rigid, her eyes wide with something that wasn't quite surprise. More like recognition, like she'd been waiting for this moment but hadn't believed it would actually come. Rook's right hand came up in a crisp, perfect salute. His expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes. Respect, gratitude, an acknowledgement that transcended words. Eden's body moved before her mind caught up. Her right hand came up, trembling, and returned the salute. Tears began streaming down her face, but her hand didn't waver. She held the salute with the precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, who understood exactly what it meant. Rook held it. 5 seconds. 10. 15. The room remained frozen, everyone watching this impossible moment unfold. Then, slowly, Rook lowered his hand. Eden followed a heartbeat later. Pruitt found his voice. "What is the meaning of this? Who are you?" Rook turned to face the judge. His voice was calm, controlled, but there was steel underneath. "My name is Admiral Declan Rook. I'm the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations. And I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor, but this trial is a miscarriage of justice." Pruitt's face went pale. "Admiral, this is highly irregular. I'm in the middle of sentencing." "You're in the middle of sentencing one of the most decorated officers in the United States Navy for crimes she didn't commit." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Journalists started typing frantically. Roland Pickett sat forward, his expression shifting from certainty to confusion. Hogarth stood, her voice sharp. "Your Honor, I don't know who this man is, but he can't just walk into a courtroom and disrupt proceedings." Rook's gaze shifted to her, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You don't know who I am? I'm the second highest ranking officer in the United States Navy. I command operations across 7 fleets. I've briefed presidents. And I'm telling you, under oath if necessary, that Lieutenant Commander Eden Falk is not a fraud." Pruitt's hand was shaking slightly. "Admiral, with all due respect, the evidence shows that Ms. Falk was a supply technician. Her service record contains no mention of combat, no special warfare training, and no decorations beyond standard awards." Rook's expression hardened. "Her service record is classified under a national security directive. What you're looking at is a cover file. Her actual record is sealed." The whispers grew louder. Simone Ibarra, sitting in the back, allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Pruitt leaned forward, his voice strained. Classified? Admiral, if her record is classified, how are we supposed to verify anything? You verify it by asking the right people. You verify it by contacting Naval Special Warfare Command. You verify it by doing your due diligence instead of assuming a decorated officer is lying because her file looks ordinary. That's exactly the point of a cover file, Your Honor. It's supposed to look ordinary. Hogarth's face was red. Your Honor, this is absurd. If Ms. Falk's service was classified, she could have informed the court. She could have requested that we contact the appropriate authorities. Rook turned to her, and his voice was quiet but cut like a blade. She couldn't. Because she's not allowed to. Everything about her service, every mission she ran, every operation she participated in, is classified at the highest levels. Revealing any of it would be a federal crime. She was willing to go to prison rather than break her oath. Eden was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking, but she remained standing. Loftus stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Rook turned back to the courtroom. On August 14, 2019, I was part of a joint task force conducting a classified operation in hostile territory. I can't tell you where. I can't tell you the details. But I can tell you what Lieutenant Commander Falk did. The room was so quiet, you could hear the rain starting again outside. Our mission was compromised. We were ambushed by enemy forces. 12 men, including me, were pinned down in a kill zone with no air support and no extraction available for 4 hours. We had one sniper providing overwatch. Lieutenant Commander Eden Falk. He paused, his voice catching slightly before he forced it steady. She held position on an exposed ridgeline, alone, taking fire from 3 different directions. She engaged 17 enemy combatants over the course of 4 hours, neutralizing every threat that could have prevented our extraction. She was shot twice, once in the left shoulder, once in the right side, just below the ribs. She refused medical evacuation until every man on that team was safely on the helicopter. Rook's jaw tightened. 3 of us wouldn't have made it home without her. I'm one of them. The silence was absolute. Roland Pickett's face had gone from confusion to something like horror. Hogarth was staring at her files like they'd betrayed her. Rook reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and circular, a 4-star Admiral's Challenge coin, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He placed it carefully on the table in front of Eden. Her silver star is real. Her Navy Cross is real. Her Purple Heart is real. Every medal she's earned is documented in a file that none of you are cleared to see. And the reason she couldn't defend herself is because defending herself would mean revealing classified information that could put active operations and personnel at risk. He turned to Pruitt, and his voice softened just slightly. She's the most honorable person I've ever served with, Your Honor, and you were about to send her to prison for it. Pruitt looked like he'd been struck. His face was ashen. His hands were trembling. I had no way of knowing. You had every way of knowing. You could have contacted the appropriate channels. You could have verified before you rushed to judgment. But you didn't. You looked at a woman who didn't fit your idea of what a hero looks like, and you assumed she was lying. Eden's knees buckled, slightly. Rook's hand shot out, steadying her by the elbow. Easy, Commander. You're okay. She nodded, unable to speak. Hogarth was gathering her files, her face burning. Your Honor, if the defendant's record is classified, we had no access to that information. This case was brought forward based on the evidence available to us. Rook's voice was cold. The evidence available to you was a cover file designed specifically to hide the truth. You didn't verify, you didn't investigate, you prosecuted a decorated officer because it was easy and it looked good on paper. Pruitt cleared his throat. He looked smaller now, diminished. Admiral Rook, I appreciate you bringing this information to the court, but I need to understand the procedure here. If Ms. Falk's service is classified, how do we proceed? You dismiss the charges, you apologize to her, and you let her leave with her dignity intact, which is more than this court has given her so far. Pruitt nodded slowly. He looked at Eden, and for the first time, there was something like shame in his expression. Ms. Falk, in light of this new information, I move to dismiss all charges against you. The case is dismissed. I offer my sincere apologies for what you've endured here today. Loftus finally found his voice. Granted, Your Honor. Emphatically granted. Pruitt brought down the gavel. Case dismissed. The sound echoed through the courtroom. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, one person in the gallery stood. Then another. Then, everyone. A standing ovation, silent and solemn, spreading through the room like a wave. Eden didn't look at them. She kept her eyes on the coin Rook had placed on the table. Her hands were shaking. Her breathing was uneven. Rook kept his hand on her elbow, steadying her. "Let's get you out of here, Commander," he said quietly. She nodded. Together, they turned and walked toward the aisle. The two junior officers fell into step behind them, creating a protective formation. As they passed Roland Pickett, the older veteran stood with his hand over his heart, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Eden paused. She looked at him, and for just a moment, her expression softened. She nodded once. Not forgiveness, exactly, but acknowledgement. Then she kept walking. The journalists were on their feet, shouting questions. "Commander Falk, how do you feel? Will you sue? What missions did you run? Can you tell us anything about your service?" Rook raised a hand, and the questions stopped. No questions. This woman has sacrificed enough. Let her have her peace. They reached the doors. Rook pushed them open, and they stepped into the hallway. The doors swung shut behind them, muffling the sound of the courtroom. Eden stopped. She leaned against the wall, her legs finally giving out. She slid down until she was sitting on the floor, head in her hands, sobbing. Rook knelt beside her. The two junior officers stood a respectful distance away, blocking the hallway from anyone who might try to approach. "You did good, Commander," Rook said softly. "You held the line. You kept your oath. You did everything right." Eden looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. "I didn't want this. I didn't want anyone to know. I know. But they were going to send you to prison. I couldn't let that happen. My cover's blown. Every operation I ran, every asset I worked with, it's all compromised now." Rook's expression was pained. "I know, and I'm sorry. But you're alive, you're free, and you get to keep living." Eden shook her head. "I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be anything other than invisible." Rook offered his hand. She took it, and he helped her to her feet. "Then you figure it out. One day at a time. That's all any of us can do." She nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Simone Ibarra emerged from the courtroom, closing her portfolio. She walked over to Rook and handed him a folder. "Everything's documented. The press is already running with the story. By tonight, she'll be national news." Rook took the folder, but didn't open it. He looked at Eden. "Are you ready for that?" Eden's laugh was bitter and exhausted. "Does it matter?" "No. I suppose it doesn't." They started walking down the hallway, their footsteps echoing off the tile floors. Outside, the rain had picked up again, drumming against the windows. They could see the press gathering on the courthouse steps, cameras ready, microphones extended. Rook stopped before they reached the exit. "Commander, I know this isn't what you wanted, but for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. Not just for what you did in the field, for what you did in that courtroom. You held your ground when everyone was against you. That takes a different kind of courage." Eden looked at him, and for the first time since he'd walked into the courtroom, she allowed herself a small, fragile smile. "Thank you, sir." They pushed through the doors and stepped out into the rain. The press surged forward, shouting questions, cameras flashing. Rook positioned himself between Eden and the crowd, his presence creating a barrier. "No questions," he said firmly. "Give her space." But the cameras kept rolling, the questions kept coming, and Eden realized, standing there on the courthouse steps with rain soaking through her borrowed blazer, that her life, as she'd known it, was over. She'd been invisible for so long, a ghost moving through the world, doing her job, asking for nothing. And now, in the space of 20 minutes, she'd been dragged into the light. Her face would be on every news channel. Her story would be dissected by strangers. Her silence, which had protected her for years, had been shattered. Rook guided her toward a waiting car. The junior officers opened the doors. Eden slid into the back seat, and Rook followed. The doors closed, muffling the chaos outside. The car pulled away from the curb. Eden watched through the window as the courthouse receded into the distance, the crowd of reporters growing smaller. She could still see flashes from the cameras, still see the shapes of people shouting after them. "I didn't want this," she said again, more to herself than to Rook. "I know," he replied, "but it's done now, and you're going to have to figure out how to live with it." Eden closed her eyes. The rain drummed on the roof of the car. The city moved past in a blur of gray and noise. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a question was forming. A question she didn't have an answer to yet. Who was she now, if she couldn't be invisible anymore? What did you become when the only identity you'd ever known was stripped away, and you were left standing in front of the world with nowhere to hide? The car turned a corner. The courthouse disappeared from view, and Eden Falk, decorated officer, classified operator, and reluctant hero, sat in silence and tried to imagine what came next. If you've ever had to choose between the truth and your freedom, or known someone who carried secrets too heavy to share, leave a comment and let us know. And if you want to see how Eden rebuilds her life after everything she knew was taken from her, make sure you're subscribed. Part 3 is where the real story begins. The car moved through Portland streets without hurry. Rain continued to fall, softer now, painting everything in shades of gray. Eden sat in the back seat beside Admiral Rook, staring out the window at a city that suddenly felt foreign. She'd walked these streets for years, bought groceries at the corner market, rode the bus to her apartment, lived a quiet life where nobody looked twice at her. That was over now. Rook was on his phone, speaking in the clipped, efficient tones of someone managing a crisis. "Yes, I understand. No, she won't be making any statements. That's correct. Route everything through my office." He ended the call and looked at Eden. "The press is going to be relentless. They'll camp outside your apartment. They'll find your neighbors, your coworkers, anyone who might have a story to tell. You need to be prepared for that." Eden's voice was hollow. "I just want to go home." "I know, but home isn't going to be the same place it was this morning." The car pulled up to a modest apartment building in a quiet neighborhood. It looked exactly as Eden had left it hours ago. Same chipped paint on the entrance door, same broken security light, same overflowing recycling bin by the curb. But there were already 2 news vans parked across the street, cameras pointed at the building. Rook saw them too. His jaw tightened. "We'll go in the back. I'll have security posted until things calm down." Eden shook her head. "I don't want security. I don't want handlers. I just want to be left alone." "Commander, with respect, that's not an option right now." The car circled around to the alley behind the building. One of the junior officers got out first, checking the area. He gave a signal, and Rook opened the door. Eden stepped out into the rain. The air smelled like wet concrete and exhaust. She pulled the borrowed blazer tighter around herself and walked toward the back entrance. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor. The stairwell was narrow and dim, the kind of place landlords forgot to maintain. Her footsteps echoed on the concrete steps. Rook followed a few paces behind, giving her space but staying close enough to help if she needed it. Eden unlocked her door and stepped inside. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it. Small, sparse, a single duffel bag in the corner, a mattress on the floor with military corners, no pictures on the walls, no personal items visible. It looked like a place someone was only temporarily occupying, like she'd never really moved in at all. Rook stood in the doorway, taking it in. "This is where you've been living?" Eden set her keys on the counter. "It's enough. Commander, you're a decorated officer. You've earned more than this. I didn't do it for a reward, I know that. But you deserve better." Eden turned to face him. The exhaustion was written across her features, dark circles under her eyes, hollow cheeks, the kind of tired that came from carrying weight for too long. "What do I deserve, Admiral? A medal ceremony? A parade? My face on the news so everyone can dissect my life and decide whether I'm a hero or just someone who got lucky?" Rook's expression softened. "You deserve peace. And I'm sorry that what I did today took that from you." Eden walked to the window and looked out. From here, she could see the news vans on the street below. More were arriving. "You did what you had to do. I understand that. But understanding doesn't make it easier." She pressed her forehead against the glass. The city stretched out before her, lights beginning to flicker on as evening approached. Somewhere out there, people were going about their lives, making dinner, watching television, arguing about things that didn't matter, normal things. "How long before I can have that again?" she asked quietly. Rook didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was honest. "I don't know." Eden nodded. She'd expected that answer. She turned away from the window and looked around her apartment. Everything she owned fit in a single duffel bag. No photographs, no mementos, nothing that tied her to the person she used to be. She'd spent years stripping away every part of herself that could be used to identify her. And now, in one afternoon, all of that work had been undone. "I need to be alone," she said. Rook hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. "This is my direct line. If you need anything, call, day or night. I mean that." Eden took the card. "Thank you. And, Commander, you did the right thing. Staying silent, keeping your oath. That matters more than you know." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Eden stood in the center of her apartment, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. Then there was silence. She walked to the mattress and sat down. The Admiral's challenge coin was still in her pocket. She pulled it out and turned it over in her hands. The weight of it was substantial, 4 stars embossed on one side, the Navy SEAL on the other. It was a symbol of respect, given from one warrior to another. Eden set it on the floor beside her mattress. Then she lay back and stared at the ceiling. The light was fading outside. Shadows stretched across the room. She could hear muffled sounds from neighboring apartments, someone's television, a baby crying, normal sounds from normal lives. She closed her eyes. For the first time in hours, she let herself breathe without counting, let herself exist without purpose. She was so tired, not the physical exhaustion of a long mission, but something deeper, soul tired, the kind of tired that came from fighting battles nobody else could see. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Texts and calls flooding in, reporters, old contacts, people she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanting to reconnect. She turned the phone off and set it aside. The rain picked up again, drumming against the window. Eden listened to it, letting the sound fill the silence. Rain had always been a comfort. It made the world feel smaller, more contained, like everything outside the immediate space didn't exist. She thought about the courtroom, the judge's face when Rook walked in, the way the entire room had shifted in an instant, from certainty to confusion to something like awe. She'd sat through the whole thing feeling like she was watching it happen to someone else, like the moment belonged to a different version of her that she no longer recognized. Hours passed. The room grew darker. Eden didn't turn on any lights. She just lay there, suspended in the space between who she'd been and who she'd have to become. Eventually, hunger pulled her to her feet. She walked to the small kitchenette and opened the refrigerator. It was mostly empty. A carton of eggs, some leftover rice, a bottle of water. She wasn't sure when she'd last gone grocery shopping. Time had gotten away from her in the weeks leading up to the trial. She made scrambled eggs and ate them standing at the counter. They had no taste. She ate because her body needed fuel, not because she wanted to. When she finished, she washed the plate and set it in the drying rack. Then she returned to the mattress. Sleep didn't come. Her mind was too active, replaying moments from the trial. The psychologist saying she'd constructed a false identity. The veteran who'd reported her, tears streaming down his face as he apologized. The judge's expression when Rook revealed the truth. All of it played on a loop, each memory sharp and clear. Around midnight, there was a knock on her door, soft but insistent. Eden sat up. "Commander Falk?" "It's Simone Ibarra. We met briefly at the courthouse." Eden recognized the name, the woman who'd been sitting in the gallery, the one who'd whispered that it wouldn't be much longer. She walked to the door and opened it a crack, keeping the chain lock engaged. Simone stood in the hallway, still wearing business casual, her leather portfolio under one arm. "I know it's late. I'm sorry, but I wanted to check on you." Eden studied her. "Who are you?" "I'm Admiral Rook's aide. I've been coordinating the logistics of your case for the past 3 weeks. Why? Because he asked me to. And because what happened to you was wrong." Eden considered closing the door, but something in Simone's expression stopped her. There was no pity there, no judgment, just quiet professionalism. She unlatched the chain and let the door swing open. Simone stepped inside, glancing around the sparse apartment without comment. She set her portfolio on the counter. "I won't stay long. I just wanted to give you this." She pulled out a folder and handed it to Eden. Inside were official documents, transfer orders, new credentials, a bank account statement showing a substantial deposit. "What is this?" Admiral Rook made arrangements. You're being reassigned to a new unit. Technically, you'll be on indefinite administrative leave while your case is reviewed, but you'll receive full pay and benefits. The deposit is back pay for the months you spent preparing for trial without income. Eden stared at the papers. I didn't ask for this. I know. But you earned it, and the Admiral wanted to make sure you were taken care of. Eden set the folder aside. I don't need to be taken care of. Simone's expression softened. Commander, I've read your file, your real file. I know what you've done, I know what you sacrificed, and I know you're not comfortable accepting help. But sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is let people support you. Eden didn't respond. She walked back to the window and looked out at the news vans below. They were still there, lights on, waiting. Simone followed her gaze. They'll leave eventually. The story will move on. Something else will capture their attention, and you'll fade back into obscurity. But until then, you're going to have to endure it. I've endured worse. I know you have. That's why I think you'll get through this too. Simone moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Commander, what you did in that courtroom took more courage than most people will ever understand. You held your ground when everything was against you. That's something to be proud of. Eden turned to look at her. I'm not proud. I'm just tired. Then rest. You've earned that too. Simone left, closing the door gently behind her. Eden stood alone in her apartment once more. The folder sat on the counter, official and intimidating. She ignored it and returned to the mattress. Sleep finally came sometime before dawn. It was shallow and restless, filled with fragments of dreams that felt more like memories. Sand and heat and the weight of a rifle. The sound of gunfire echoing across empty spaces. The face of a man she'd pulled from a burning vehicle, thanking her, with his last breath. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window. Her body ached from lying on the thin mattress. She sat up slowly, orienting herself. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back. The trial, the Admiral, the press. She checked her phone. 43 missed calls. Over 100 text messages. She scrolled through them without reading. Most were from reporters. A few were from people claiming to be old friends. None of them mattered. There was one message from an unknown number. It was short, simple. Thank you for your service. From one ghost to another. Eden stared at it for a long time. Then she deleted it and turned the phone off again. She showered, letting the hot water run until it turned cold. When she got out, she dressed in clean clothes, jeans, a plain gray shirt, her old boots. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. Thinner than she used to be, harder around the edges, but still standing. She made coffee and drank it black. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She opened her duffel bag and pulled out a small wooden box hidden at the bottom. Inside were the only personal items she'd kept. A folded flag from her father's funeral, a photograph of her mother taken before the cancer, and a set of dog tags that didn't belong to her. She held the dog tags up to the light. They belonged to a man named Marcus Reeve, her spotter during her first deployment. He'd been killed by an IED 3 months into their tour. She'd carried his tags ever since, a reminder of what they'd all lost. Eden put everything back in the box and closed it. Some things were too heavy to carry every day, but they were still worth keeping. Over the next few days, Eden stayed in her apartment, watching the world through her window like she was observing it from behind glass. The news vans remained for 48 hours, then began to thin out. By the end of the week, only one remained, and by the following Monday, even that was gone. But the attention didn't disappear entirely. It just changed form. Her phone continued to ring at odd hours, her email inbox filled with interview requests, book deals, speaking engagements. A production company wanted to option her story for a limited series. A veterans advocacy group wanted her to be their spokesperson. Everyone wanted a piece of her narrative, wanted to shape it into something they could use. Eden ignored all of it. She ventured out only when necessary, and even then, she planned her movements carefully. Early morning grocery runs when the streets were empty. Late-night walks along routes she knew would be deserted. She wore a baseball cap pulled low and kept her head down. Most people didn't recognize her. The ones who did offered awkward smiles or quiet nods. Nobody approached directly, but she could feel their eyes following her, could hear the whispers that started after she passed. That's her. The seal. The one from the trial. 2 weeks after the trial, Admiral Rook called. His voice was professional but concerned. "Commander, I wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine. Are you really?" Eden looked around her apartment. The same 4 walls she'd been staring at for days. The same empty space that felt both like a refuge and a prison. "I'm managing. That's not what I asked." She didn't respond. Rook sighed. "Commander, I know this transition is difficult. I know you're used to operating independently. But you don't have to do this alone. We have resources, counseling services, support groups for operators transitioning out of classified work, people who understand what you're going through. I appreciate that, Admiral, but I'll handle it my own way." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Rook's voice, when he spoke again, was quieter. "Eden, I've seen too many good operators struggle after exposure. The transition from shadow work to public life, it's not easy. It messes with your head in ways you don't expect. Please don't wait until it's too late to ask for help." "I won't." She would. They both knew it. "The offer stands," Rook said. "Anytime, day or night." "Thank you, sir." After the call ended, Eden sat with her phone in her hand, staring at Rook's contact information. He meant well, they all did, but they didn't understand that help wasn't what she needed. She needed time, space, distance from everything that had happened. She needed to figure out who she was when she wasn't invisible anymore. 3 weeks after the trial, Eden received a package. It arrived in the early afternoon, left outside her door by a courier who didn't wait for a signature. No return address, just her name written in precise block letters. She brought it inside and set it on the counter, studying it for several minutes before opening it. Old habits. Always assume a package could be dangerous until proven otherwise. Inside was a single item, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. A framed photograph of her team from 2019. She recognized it immediately as the photo she'd had on her wall, but this version was different. The faces weren't blurred. She could see every detail with crystalline clarity. Marcus Reeve on the left, his smile genuine despite the dust caking his face. Lieutenant Shaw with his arm draped across her shoulders, exhausted but alive. Petty Officer Chen crouched in front, giving the camera an enthusiastic thumbs up, and her, standing in the center, looking more like herself than she had in years. There was a note tucked inside the frame, written in the same precise handwriting as the address. "Thought you might want to remember them the way they really were. Some faces are too important to blur. Stay strong." R. Eden carried the photograph to her mattress and sat down, holding it in her lap. She traced each face with her finger, remembering. Marcus's terrible jokes that somehow always landed. Shaw's obsessive planning that had saved their lives more times than she could count. Chen's infectious optimism that made even the worst days bearable. She set the photograph on the small table beside her mattress, angling it so she could see it when she lay down. For the first time since the trial, she felt something close to peace. Not happiness exactly, but a quiet recognition that the people who mattered, the ones who'd been there in the moments that defined her, they were still with her in the ways that counted. The days began to blur together. Eden developed a routine that kept her moving, without requiring her to engage with the world more than necessary. Wake before dawn. Run along the river when the city was still sleeping. Return home. Shower. Coffee. Read. Avoid the news. Avoid social media. Avoid anything that might remind her that somewhere out there, people were still talking about her. In the afternoons, she found herself drawn to coffee shops in neighborhoods where nobody knew her. She'd sit in corners with a book she wasn't really reading, watching people live their ordinary lives, a mother struggling with a stroller, students arguing about philosophy, an elderly couple sharing a pastry, normal moments, unremarkable and beautiful in their simplicity. She envied them, not their specific circumstances, but their anonymity, the freedom to exist without scrutiny, to make mistakes without them becoming headlines, to simply be human without it being analyzed and dissected. One afternoon in late October, she was sitting in a coffee shop near the university when a young woman approached her table, early 20s, wearing an Army ROTC hoodie, carrying herself with the uncertain confidence of someone still learning how to be a soldier. "Excuse me, are you Eden Falk?" Eden's first instinct was to deny it, but something in the young woman's expression stopped her. There was no aggression there, no demand for a selfie or an autograph, Just genuine curiosity mixed with something that looked like admiration. Yes. The young woman smiled, nervous but determined. I'm sorry to bother you. I just wanted to say thank you. For what you did, not just in the field, but in that courtroom. My instructors keep telling us that integrity means doing the right thing even when it costs you everything. You showed us what that actually looks like. Eden didn't know what to say. The young woman seemed to sense her discomfort and took a small step back. Anyway, I just wanted you to know that what you did mattered, to a lot of us. She gave an awkward wave and turned to leave. Wait. The young woman turned back. What's your name? Cadet Lara Weston, ma'am. Eden nodded slowly. Keep that integrity, Cadet Weston. The moment you compromise it, even for good reasons, you start losing pieces of yourself you can't get back. Weston's expression grew serious. Yes, ma'am, I will. She left, and Eden returned to her untouched book. But the interaction stayed with her. It hadn't occurred to her that her silence, her refusal to compromise, might mean something to others. She'd been so focused on her own loss, her own exposure, that she hadn't considered what her actions might have demonstrated. That evening, she walked to the Veterans Memorial downtown for the first time since moving to Portland. It was a small park with granite walls listing names of fallen service members from Oregon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the engraved letters. She found Marcus Reeves' name on the second panel. She traced it with her fingers. The stone was cold and smooth, worn by weather and time. I kept your tags, she said quietly. I hope that's okay. I know you told me not to blame myself, but I still do sometimes. I still wonder if I could have done something different that day. The wind rustled through nearby trees. Leaves skittered across the pavement. A lot has happened since you've been gone. I got exposed. My cover's blown. Everyone knows who I am now, what I did. I'm not sure how I feel about it yet. Some days it feels like freedom. Most days it feels like I've lost something I can't get back. She stayed there as the light faded, talking to a name on a wall because it was easier than talking to the living. Marcus had always been a good listener, patient, non-judgmental. He'd understood the weight they carried without needing it explained. As full dark settled, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned, half expecting to find herself alone despite the sound. But someone was there. An older man, wearing a VFW cap and a windbreaker covered in unit patches. It took her a moment to recognize him. Roland Pickett, the veteran who'd testified against her. Her body tensed instinctively. Pickett saw it and stopped several feet away, raising his hands slightly in a gesture of peace. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said. His voice was thick with emotion. I've been hoping to run into you, to apologize properly. Eden studied him. His posture was submissive, apologetic. His eyes were red, like he'd been crying or hadn't slept well in weeks. She relaxed slightly but remained cautious. You don't need to apologize. Yes, I do. Pickett took a hesitant step closer. I spent 30 years in the Navy. I thought I knew what service looked like. I thought I could spot a fraud. But I was wrong. I let my assumptions blind me. I looked at you and saw someone who didn't fit my narrow definition of what a warrior should be, and I reported you without doing my due diligence. He pulled off his cap, wringing it in his hands. I've spent every day since that trial reading about what you did, the missions you ran, the people you saved, and I'm ashamed. Not just because I was wrong, but because I should have known better. I should have looked deeper. I should have given you the benefit of the doubt. Eden turned back to the memorial wall. Marcus's name was barely visible in the darkness. You were protecting something you believed in. The integrity of the awards, the honor of the service. I understand that impulse. Understanding doesn't make it right, no, but it makes it human. Pickett moved to stand beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. He looked at the names on the wall, his expression solemn. I lost friends whose names are on this wall, good men who earned their honors through blood and sacrifice. When I saw you wearing that silver star, all I could think about was them, about protecting their legacy. But I was protecting an idea while hurting a real person, someone who'd earned those honors just as much as anyone. Eden didn't respond immediately. She watched the last light fade from the sky, the memorial slowly disappearing into shadow. Finally, she spoke. I don't blame you, Mr. Pickett. You did what you thought was right. That takes courage, too. A different kind, maybe, but courage nonetheless. Pickett's voice broke. I made your life hell. You made it complicated. Eden turned to face him. But complicated isn't always bad. Sometimes it forces us to confront things we've been avoiding. You forced me to confront the fact that I can't hide forever, that eventually the truth finds a way out, whether we want it to or not. I still wish I'd done things differently. So do I. But we can't change the past. We can only decide what we do now. Pickett extended his hand. Thank you for your service, Commander, and thank you for your grace. I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful for it. Eden shook his hand. His grip was firm, sincere. Thank you for yours. They stood together at the memorial as darkness settled completely. Two veterans, separated by circumstance but connected by something deeper than either could fully articulate. The shared understanding of what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, to carry weight that never fully lifted. Eventually, Pickett put his cap back on and turned to leave. Before he walked away, he paused. If you ever need anything, Commander, someone to talk to or just someone who understands, you have my number. Don't hesitate to use it. Eden nodded. Thank you. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving her alone with the memorial and her thoughts. She stayed until the cold drove her home. As she walked through the quiet streets, she realized something had shifted inside her. The anger she'd been carrying, the resentment toward Pickett and the judge and everyone who doubted her, it had started to dissolve. Not completely, but enough that she could breathe a little easier. Forgiveness wasn't a switch you flipped. It was a process, a choice you made again and again until it became easier than holding on to the hurt. November arrived with gray skies and early darkness. The city took on a different character in the shortened days. People hurried more, smiled less. Everyone seemed to be bracing for the long winter ahead. Eden found herself restless in ways she hadn't been before. The apartment that had felt like a sanctuary now felt confining. She needed to move, to do something, to find purpose in a life that suddenly had none of the structure she'd relied on for years. She started volunteering at a community center in a neighborhood where nobody knew her face. They needed someone to help with their after-school program, working with kids whose parents worked late shifts. It wasn't glamorous. Mostly it involved helping with homework, breaking up arguments, and making sure nobody left before their parent arrived. But it was something, a way to be useful without being in the spotlight. The kids didn't know who she was. To them, she was just Miss Eden, the quiet woman who helped with math problems and didn't yell when they got rowdy. She liked that. Liked being defined by what she did in the present rather than what she'd done in the past. One afternoon, a boy named Miguel asked her about the scars on her hands. They were faint but visible, remnants of burns from an extraction gone wrong. How'd you get those? Eden considered her answer. An accident at work. What kind of work? The kind where you have to be careful. Miguel accepted this without further questions, his attention already moving to something else. Kids were like that. Curious but easily satisfied. They didn't need complete stories, just enough to make sense of their immediate world. As weeks passed, Eden began to notice changes in herself. Small things. She slept better. The nightmares didn't come as frequently. She laughed at something one of the kids said and realized it was the first genuine laugh she'd had in months. She was healing. Not completely. Maybe never completely. But enough to function. Enough to imagine a future that extended beyond just surviving each day. One evening in mid-November, she received a call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Commander Falk? Yes. This is Lieutenant Commander Shaw. I don't know if you remember me. Eden's breath caught. Shaw, her old team leader, the man whose arm had been draped across her shoulders in the photograph Rook had sent. Of course I remember you. Shaw's voice was warm, familiar in a way that made her chest ache. I heard about what happened, the trial, the Admiral's intervention. I wanted to reach out sooner, but I wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from me. Why wouldn't I? Because I wasn't there. When you needed people to vouch for you, to stand up and verify your service. I couldn't. Everything we did is still classified. I couldn't help you, and I've been carrying that guilt for weeks. Eden walked to her window, looking out at the city lights. You couldn't break your oath any more than I could. I understand that. That doesn't make it easier, no, but it makes it necessary. There was a pause. Shaw's voice, when he spoke again, was quieter. How are you really doing, Eden? Not the official answer, the real one. Eden considered the question. Honestly, I don't know. Some days I'm okay. Some days I feel like I'm drowning. But I'm still here, still moving forward. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. Shaw paused. Listen, I know you're probably not ready for this yet, but some of us from the old team, we're planning to meet up in Seattle next month. Nothing official, just drinks and catching up. It would mean a lot if you came. Eden felt something twist in her chest. The idea of seeing her old team, of being reminded of who she used to be, it terrified her. But there was also something appealing about it, a chance to reconnect with people who knew her, really knew her, before everything got complicated. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking. Shaw gave her the details. Take your time, no pressure. But we'd love to see you. After they hung up, Eden sat with her phone in her hand, staring at the date Shaw had mentioned. December 15th. A little over a month away. Could she do it? Could she face the people who'd known her when she was whole, before the exposure and the trial and everything that came after? She didn't know, but the fact that she was considering it felt like progress. December arrived with the first real cold snap of winter. Ice formed on the edges of puddles. People's breath became visible. The city took on the quiet stillness that came with freezing temperatures and shortened days. Eden continued her routine. Morning runs, though shorter now because of the cold. Afternoons at the community center. Evenings reading or watching the city from her window. It wasn't exciting, but it was stable. And stability, she was learning, had its own value. 2 weeks before the planned reunion in Seattle, she received another package. This time, she recognized the handwriting. Simone Ibarra. Inside was a leather journal and a note. Commander Falk, Admiral Rook suggested I send this to you. He thinks it might help to write about what you're experiencing. Not for publication or official record. Just for yourself. A way to process everything that's happened. I hope you don't find this presumptuous. S.I. Eden set the journal on her table and left it there for 3 days, untouched. The idea of writing down her thoughts felt dangerous, like codifying emotions that were safer left undefined. But on the 4th day, she opened it and wrote a single sentence. I don't know who I am anymore, and I'm trying to figure out if that's frightening or freeing. The next day, she wrote another sentence, then a paragraph, then pages. Not a chronological account, but fragments, memories, questions, fears. It poured out of her in a way she hadn't expected, filling page after page with ink that sometimes smudged where tears had fallen. She wrote about Marcus and the guilt she carried, about the courtroom and the humiliation, about Rook's salute and what it had meant, about the strange limbo she existed in now, neither fully civilian nor fully military, neither invisible nor comfortably visible. Writing didn't solve anything, but it helped, gave shape to feelings that had been too large and formless to grapple with, made them manageable, containable. On December 14th, the day before the reunion, Eden stood in her apartment trying to decide if she'd actually go. Her train ticket to Seattle sat on the counter. Her bag was packed, but she couldn't make herself move toward the door. What if seeing her old team made everything worse? What if they looked at her differently now, saw her as damaged or compromised? What if she'd changed so much that she didn't fit with them anymore? Her phone rang. Shaw's name on the screen. She answered. Hey yourself. Just checking if you're still planning to come tomorrow. I don't know. Eden, you don't have to. If it's too much, we'll understand. But I think it might be good for you, good for all of us. We miss you. The simple honesty of that statement broke something loose in her chest. I miss you too. All of you. Then come. Even if it's just for a few hours. Let us see that you're okay. Eden looked around her apartment. The sparse walls, the minimal furniture, the life she'd built that wasn't really a life, just an existence. Maybe it was time to risk something, to step outside the careful boundaries she'd constructed and see what happened. Okay, I'll be there. Shaw's relief was audible. Good. That's really good. Text me when your train gets in. I'll pick you up from the station. The next morning, Eden boarded a train to Seattle. She sat by the window, watching Oregon countryside give way to Washington forests. The motion was soothing, the landscape changing, but the direction constant. It felt metaphorical in ways she didn't want to analyze too deeply. Shaw was waiting at King Street Station when she arrived. He looked older than she remembered, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes. But his smile was the same, warm and genuine and exactly what she needed. He pulled her into a hug without asking permission. She stiffened initially, then relaxed into it, allowing herself to be held by someone who knew what she'd been through because he'd been there beside her. "It's good to see you, Eden." "You too." They drove to a bar in Capitol Hill. Nothing fancy, just a neighborhood place with dim lighting and worn booths, and the kind of atmosphere that invited conversation without demanding it. 3 others from the old team were already there. Chen, still enthusiastic and optimistic despite everything. Lieutenant Graves, quiet and thoughtful. And Petty Officer Rodriguez, whose dark humor had gotten them through the worst days. They stood when Eden entered. For a moment, nobody spoke. They just looked at each other, survivors of something that couldn't be explained to anyone who hadn't been there. Then Chen broke the silence. "Damn, Falk, you look like hell." Eden laughed. It came out rough and unexpected. "Thanks. You look pretty terrible yourself." The tension broke. They all moved in for hugs and handshakes and the kind of physical affirmation that said more than words could. Then they sat, ordered drinks, and began the delicate process of reconnecting. They both didn't talk about the trial at first. They talked around it, about where they were living, what they were doing, the adjustments they were all making to life outside operational status. Eventually, inevitably, the conversation found its way to what had happened to Eden. "We heard bits and pieces," Shaw said, "but never got the full story. How bad was it really?" Eden stared at her drink. "Bad. They had me dead to rights based on the cover file. No way to defend myself without breaking classification. I was going to prison." Rodriguez leaned forward, but Rook came through. Eden nodded. "He exposed me to save me," which is ironic in ways I'm still processing. Chen's usual optimism faltered. "What does that mean for your future? Can you still operate?" "No. My face is out there. My real record is compromised. I'm effectively done with that kind of work." The table went quiet. They all understood what she'd lost, the identity, the purpose, the clear mission that defined every day. "So, what are you going to do?" Graves asked. Eden shrugged. "Figure it out as I go. That's all I can do." They drank. They talked. They told stories about missions that were slowly becoming memories instead of fresh experiences. They laughed about Chen's terrible navigation that one time in Kandahar, about Rodriguez's running feud with the supply sergeant, about Shaw's obsessive pre-mission rituals that everyone mocked but secretly found comforting. And slowly, Eden felt something shift. These people had known her before the trial. They'd known her during the missions that defined her. And they still saw her the same way. Not as damaged or broken, just as Eden, still standing, still fighting, still one of them. As the evening wore on and the bar grew quieter, Shaw walked Eden back to her hotel. The Seattle streets were cold and damp, typical December weather. Their breath fogged in the air between them. "Thank you for coming," Shaw said. "I know it wasn't easy. It was necessary. I didn't realize how much I needed this until I was here." Shaw stopped walking and turned to face her. "Eden, I want you to know something. What you did, staying silent to protect the mission, that was the hardest thing any of us have ever had to do. You carried that weight alone because you had to. But you're not alone anymore. We're here, all of us. Whatever you need." Eden felt tears building, but refused to let them fall. "I appreciate that. I mean it. You saved my life in that extraction. You saved all our lives. And then you saved the integrity of everything we did by refusing to compromise it in that courtroom. You're the bravest person I know. I don't feel brave. I feel lost. Then let us help you find your way." Shaw's expression was earnest. "You don't have to figure this out alone." Eden nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They stood there in the cold for another moment. Then Shaw pulled her into another hug. "Get some rest, Eden. We're doing breakfast tomorrow before you head back. No arguments." She returned to her hotel room and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling more settled than she had in months. Seeing her team, being reminded that she was still part of something bigger than herself, it had given her something she'd been missing. Not answers exactly, but hope. The possibility that healing wasn't just about time passing, but about reconnecting with the parts of yourself that mattered. She pulled out the journal Simone had sent and wrote, "I saw my team today, the people who knew me before everything got complicated. And I realized something. I've been so focused on what I lost that I forgot to see what I still have. I'm still the person who held that ridgeline, who made the hard calls, who chose honor over ease. That person doesn't disappear just because circumstances change. She's still here, still fighting, just in different ways now. The train ride back to Portland the next day felt different, lighter somehow. The landscape passing by wasn't just scenery anymore. It was distance traveled, progress made, movement in a direction that felt right even if the destination was unclear. When she returned to her apartment, it looked exactly the same, but she saw it differently, not as a prison or a hiding place, but as a foundation, a place to start from while she figured out what came next. Over the following weeks, Eden began to make changes, small ones at first. She bought actual furniture instead of living out of a duffel bag. She hung the photograph of her team on the wall where she could see it. She started cooking real meals instead of eating standing at the counter. She continued volunteering at the community center, finding purpose in the routine of helping kids with homework and mediating their small dramas. It wasn't saving lives in combat zones, but it mattered, to them, and increasingly, to her. She started running with a group that met at dawn by the river. They were mostly veterans, people processing their own transitions. Nobody asked intrusive questions. They just ran together, sharing the silence and the physical exertion and the unspoken understanding that movement helped when words failed. In January, she received a formal offer from Naval Special Warfare Command, a teaching position at the training center, passing on knowledge to the next generation of operators. It would mean structure, purpose, a way to stay connected to the community that had defined her for so long. She thought about it for a week before accepting. It felt right, not a return to who she'd been, but an evolution into something new. She could use what she'd learned, help others avoid the mistakes she'd made, create meaning from the experiences that had nearly broken her. On a cold afternoon in late January, Eden walked back to the Veterans Memorial. The winter sun was low, casting long shadows across the granite walls. She found Marcus's name and stood before it, her hands in her pockets against the cold. "I'm doing okay," she said quietly. "It took a while, longer than I wanted, but I'm getting there. I've got a new job starting next month. Teaching position, nothing classified, just helping train the next generation. I think you'd approve." The wind rustled through bare trees. A few other people were scattered around the memorial, paying their own respects. "I'm learning that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding a way to carry what happened without letting it crush you. You taught me that, even if you didn't know it. The way you kept going even when things were impossible. The way you found reasons to laugh even in the worst situations. I'm trying to do the same." She reached out and touched his name one more time. "Thank you for being my spotter, for watching my back, for reminding me what matters. I'm going to keep going, for both of us." As she walked away from the memorial, her phone buzzed. A text from Shaw. "Heard about the teaching position. Proud of you. You're going to be great at it." She smiled and typed back, "Thanks. I'll try not to scare them too much on the first day." His response was immediate. "Scare them a little. Keeps them sharp." That evening, Eden sat at her window, watching the city come alive with lights. The same view she'd had for months. But it looked different now. Less like a reminder of everything she'd lost, and more like a canvas of possibilities she hadn't seen before. She thought about the courtroom. The moment Rook had walked through those doors. The salute that had changed everything. She thought about the long weeks of adjustment. The struggle to find solid ground in a life that had been completely upended. She thought about her team in Seattle, and the kids at the community center, and the runners who met at dawn without needing to explain why they needed to run. And she realized something. She'd spent so long trying to be invisible that she'd forgotten what it felt like to simply exist, to take up space without apology, to be seen without it being a violation. The trial had stripped away her anonymity, but it had also freed her from the burden of hiding. She couldn't go back to shadow work, couldn't operate in the spaces between official records. But maybe that was okay. Maybe there were other ways to serve, other battles to fight, other people to help. She pulled out the journal and wrote one more entry. "I've spent the last few months asking who I am, now that I can't be invisible anymore. I think I'm finally starting to find an answer. I'm someone who made impossible choices and lived with the consequences. Someone who values honor over comfort. Someone who's still figuring it out, but isn't afraid to keep trying. That's enough. That has to be enough, because this is the life I have now, and I'm choosing to live it fully instead of spending it looking back at the life I used to have. She closed the journal and set it aside. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She picked up her phone and called her mother's sister, an aunt she hadn't spoken to since the funeral. The conversation was awkward at first, both of them navigating years of silence. But slowly, carefully, they found a rhythm, talked about small things, the weather, family news, nothing profound, just the ordinary business of reconnection. When she hung up, Eden felt lighter, not healed, not fixed, but moving in the right direction. February brought more rain and the slow promise of spring hidden beneath gray skies. Eden started her new position at the training center. The work was challenging in different ways than operational deployment. She had to learn patience, how to teach skills she'd once performed instinctively, how to recognize potential in young candidates who reminded her of who she'd been a lifetime ago. The candidates didn't know her story at first. To them, she was just another instructor, demanding but fair, quiet but observant. It wasn't until someone recognized her from news coverage that whispers started spreading. She addressed it directly in her next class. Yes, I was involved in classified operations. No, I can't discuss them. What I can tell you is that everything worth doing in this career will cost you something. Sometimes it costs your anonymity. Sometimes it costs your peace of mind. Sometimes it costs pieces of yourself you didn't know you could lose. You need to decide now if you're willing to pay those costs. Because once you're in, once you've made the commitment, there's no going back to who you were before. The candidates listened with the intensity of people beginning to understand what they were signing up for. Eden saw herself in their faces. Young, determined, not yet understanding the full weight of the path they'd chosen. After class, one of the candidates approached her, a young woman named Harper with sharp eyes and steady hands. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Do you regret it? Everything you went through?" Eden considered the question carefully. Regret is complicated. I regret the pain it caused, the exposure, the loss of the life I'd built. But I don't regret the service itself. I don't regret the people I helped or the missions we completed. So, no, I don't regret it, but I also wouldn't wish it on anyone else. Harper nodded slowly, processing. "Thank you for being honest. That's all I can be at this point." As spring approached and the rain began to ease, Eden found herself settling into a rhythm that felt sustainable, not perfect, not what she'd imagined, but real and present and hers. She still had hard days. Days when the memories were too sharp and the loss too acute. Days when she wanted nothing more than to disappear back into the shadows where she'd been safe. But those days became less frequent. And when they came, she had tools to handle them, people to call, routines to anchor her. One evening in early March, she was sitting in her apartment when her phone rang, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Commander Falk, this is Judge Malcolm Pruitt." Eden sat up straighter, her body tensing instinctively. "Judge Pruitt!" His voice was uncertain, almost hesitant. "I hope I'm not intruding. I got your number from Admiral Rook's office. I wanted to reach out personally." "Okay, I've spent the last few months thinking about your trial, about the assumptions I made, the judgment I passed without having complete information, and I wanted to apologize to you directly, not just as a matter of record, but as one human being to another." Eden walked to her window, looking out at the city. She could hear genuine remorse in Pruitt's voice. He continued, "I pride myself on fairness, on careful consideration of evidence, but in your case, I let my own biases cloud my judgment. I saw someone who didn't fit my narrow definition of what a decorated warrior should look like, and I assumed you were lying. That was wrong, profoundly wrong, and I'm sorry." Eden was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she spoke. "Judge Pruitt, you did what you thought was right based on the information you had. The system failed me, not you specifically. That's generous, more generous than I deserve. It's the truth. The cover file was designed to be convincing. You couldn't have known what it was hiding. Still, I humiliated you publicly, called your service into question. I can't undo that damage, but I wanted you to know that I recognize it. And I'm sorry." Eden felt something release in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying without realizing it. "I appreciate you saying that. It means more than you might think. They talked for a few more minutes. Pruitt told her he'd been working with veterans advocacy groups, trying to ensure that future cases involving classified service would be handled differently, trying to turn his mistake into something constructive. When they hung up, Eden stood at her window for a long time, watching the city lights and thinking about forgiveness. How it wasn't weakness, how it didn't erase harm, but how it could free you from carrying the weight of someone else's failure. She pulled out her journal and wrote, "Today I learned that sometimes the people who hurt us are hurting too, carrying their own weight, making their own mistakes, and sometimes extending grace to them is as much about freeing ourselves as forgiving them. I'm not perfect at this, but I'm trying. And maybe that's all any of us can do. Keep trying, keep moving forward, keep choosing to see the humanity in others, even when they've failed to see it in us." As spring fully arrived, Portland transformed. Cherry blossoms bloomed, the rain softened, people emerged from winter's isolation, filling parks and coffee shops and streets with renewed energy. Eden felt the shift in herself too, not dramatic, but present. She found herself smiling more, engaging with the world instead of observing it from a distance, making plans beyond just getting through each day. She started having dinner with Simone Ibarra once a month. They'd bonded over shared understanding of military bureaucracy and the strange space operators occupied between military and civilian life. Simone was easy to talk to, didn't push for information Eden wasn't ready to share, just offered quiet companionship and occasional insight. She reconnected with more people from her past, not everyone. Some bridges were too burned or too complicated to rebuild, but enough to feel like she was part of a community again instead of floating alone. In April, she received an invitation to speak at a veterans event. Her first instinct was to decline, but Shaw, who'd sent the invitation, pressed her. "Eden, you have a story that matters. People need to hear it, not the classified details, just the parts about choosing integrity, about paying the cost of doing the right thing, about surviving exposure and finding a way forward." She thought about it for days before agreeing. The event was small, maybe 50 people in a community center. Veterans from different eras, different conflicts, different branches. She stood at a podium looking out at them and felt her throat tighten. But then she started talking. About the weight of classified service, about the isolation of carrying secrets, about the courtroom and the fear and the moment everything changed, about learning to live in the light after years in shadow. She didn't sugarcoat it, didn't pretend healing was linear or easy. But she also talked about hope, about the people who'd stood by her, about finding purpose in unexpected places, about the slow work of rebuilding a life from pieces that no longer fit together the way they used to. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then one person started clapping, then another, then everyone. It wasn't dramatic or theatrical, just quiet acknowledgement of shared experience, the understanding that they'd all carried things too heavy to bear, alone. Afterward, people approached her with their own stories, their own struggles with transition and exposure, and finding purpose after service. She listened to each one, offering what comfort and advice she could. And in those conversations, she realized something profound. Her exposure hadn't just destroyed her cover. It had given her a different kind of mission. She could be honest about the cost of service in ways she couldn't have been before, could help others navigate transitions she'd struggled through alone, could be the voice she'd needed when everything fell apart. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was meaningful, and meaning, she was learning, mattered more than comfort. By summer, Eden had found a stability she hadn't thought possible 6 months earlier. She had work that fulfilled her, people who cared about her, a life that felt real instead of provisional. She still carried the weight of what she'd lost, still had moments where she mourned the invisibility that had once protected her. But she'd also gained something, the freedom to be fully herself, to exist without pretense, to be known, really known, by the people who mattered. One warm evening in June, she sat on her small balcony watching sunset paint the city in shades of gold and amber. The Admiral's Challenge coin sat on the table beside her, next to Marcus's dog tags and the photograph of her team, symbols of who she'd been and who she was becoming. Her phone buzzed, a text from one of her trainees. "Thank you for what you said in class today about failure being part of growth. I needed to hear that." Eden smiled and typed back, "We all fail. What matters is what we do next. She set the phone down and looked out at the city. Somewhere down there, people were living their ordinary lives, fighting their own battles, carrying their own weight. And she was one of them now, not invisible, not a ghost, just a person trying to make it through each day with integrity and grace. The journey from that courtroom to this balcony had been long and painful, full of moments where she'd wanted to give up, where the weight felt too heavy and the path too unclear. But she'd kept moving, one step at a time, one day at a time. And now, sitting in the golden light of a summer evening, Eden Falk allowed herself something she hadn't felt in years. Peace, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose, the knowledge that she was exactly where she needed to be. She thought about what she might say to her younger self, the woman who'd stood on that ridgeline, holding position while her team extracted. What wisdom could she offer across the years? Keep going, she'd say. The hardest battles aren't the ones you fight with weapons. They're the ones you fight within yourself. The choice to stay true to your values when everything demands compromise. The decision to keep moving when stopping would be easier. The courage to be seen when hiding feels safer. Those are the battles that define you, and you're stronger than you think. The sun dipped below the horizon. The city lights began to flicker on. Eden stood and walked back inside her apartment. Tomorrow, she'd teach another class. Help another generation of warriors understand the weight they were choosing to carry. Continue the slow work of building a life that mattered. But tonight, she could rest. Could exist in this moment without fighting or planning or preparing. Could simply be Eden Falk, decorated officer, reluctant hero, survivor, teacher, friend, human. And that, finally, was enough. Have you ever known someone who sacrificed everything for a truth they couldn't speak? Someone who carried impossible weight with quiet dignity, asking for nothing in return? The world is full of people like Eden, veterans with classified service records, whistleblowers who lost their careers for doing what was right, ordinary people who made extraordinary choices and paid extraordinary costs. Their stories matter. Their sacrifices deserve recognition. If you've known someone like this, if you've been someone like this, share your story in the comments. Let's honor the invisible warriors, the ones who serve in silence, the ones who choose integrity even when it costs them everything. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you that heroism often looks like endurance rather than glory, then subscribe. Because these are the stories that need to be told, the quiet ones, the complicated ones, the ones about people who keep going even when no one's watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, the greatest courage is often the kind nobody sees until it's too late to look away.